have seen the torch of freedom pass from hand to yearning hand, and the vision of our fathers spread hope throughout this land, as the dream some fought and died for in my heart becomes my own. I will strive to keep her promise, America, my home. America, America, may God bless America, and freedom reign across America, my home. From the shorelines to the prairies, to the cities great and small, we have reaped the fruits of justice and liberty for all.
So a deep appreciation for the blessings of freedom that we know in this great and wonderful land of ours. I'm Dr. George Simon, welcoming you to another edition of Character Matters. This is the program where we talk about what I consider to be the defining issue of our time, the character crisis that plagues much of the world and affects so much of our lives, every aspect of our lives, from our economic situation to our political, social situations, our family life, just about everything you can think of. This is the defining issue of our time, I do believe, and it's what I have studied and dealt with professionally over the years and given many workshops, training workshops and public workshops about and written about in my books In Sheep's Clothing, the international bestseller on understanding and dealing with manipulative people, and Character Disturbance, the phenomenon of our age, another 5-star rated bestseller about the nature of character disturbance and all the different types of disturbed characters that you're likely to meet in your life, and what we can do about the problem, especially what to look for in the way of help if you're seeking help. And then my book for the Christian faith community, The Judas Syndrome. So I write about these things, and I blog at my blog, manipulative-people.com. It's www.manipulative-people.com. And also for the counseling resource website at the blog Psychology, Philosophy, and Real Life at www.counselingwith2lsresource.com. And then, of course, this weekly radio program, Character Matters, where we talk about the events of the week, give examples, talk about various topics, sometimes following up on the articles I've written on the internet. But we are also open to taking your calls and listening to any cares or concerns that you have. Perhaps you have a question to ask. Perhaps you have a story or an example that you'd like to share. Perhaps you've read either one of my books or one of the articles online and you have a question or a follow-up. Perhaps you even have a disagreement with some of the things that I have talked about. In any case, we'd like to hear from you. And the number to call, if you have a mind to give us a call, is 718-717-8296. That's 718-717-8296. That's the number to call to join the conversation tonight on Character Matters. Well, what an interesting week it has been. Once again, you can't make the stuff up that makes news, especially about the personalities involved. But before I get to that, I want to expand just a little bit on this whole notion that I mentioned at the beginning of the program, that I consider this character issue to be the defining issue of our time. Folks, I've been what you would appropriately call a scientist skeptic for most of my life, long before I decided to become a behavioral scientist and study formally and get trained. I've always been kind of an observer, a curious observer of the nature of our world. First, I thought I wanted to go into the astronomical sciences. The universe just always absolutely amazed me, still does. And I consider myself very fortunate to live in an age where so many wonderful discoveries are being made each and every day. Some of the discoveries of just the Hubble Space Telegraph, the Hubble Space Deep Space Telescope, some of those discoveries alone have been just breathtaking. And then, we have had these pass-by satellites that have photographed stunning photos of the outer solar system. Recently, getting pictures of Jupiter that just boggled the mind. So I've always been a big fan of the sciences, and it just had this curiosity about the nature of things. Then I even thought about physics, theoretical physics. But frankly, I don't think I have the brain power for it. It still interests me a lot. I still read a lot. I understand as much as I can, but I now know for sure. I'm not a mental midget by any stretch of the imagination, I don't think. But frankly, I knew early on when I was considering it that I didn't have what it takes to be a good theoretical nuclear physicist. But the human condition has always interested me too. And it occurred to me some while back that the last real frontier is us. Of all of the things that we don't know about, and there's still plenty we don't know. We're fortunate to live in an age where we know a great many things, where science has enabled us to develop technologies and to develop medical expertise where we can now do some pretty remarkable things. But there's still an awful lot that we don't know. So we pursue the truth about the nature of this world that we live in. And perhaps the most daunting task before us, perhaps the greatest single frontier ahead of us, what I consider to be the final and most essential frontier, is us. We don't really understand us. That's the realization I came to when I finally decided to enter the behavioral sciences some 35 plus years ago. I guess longer than that. If I do the math here, shows you math is not my strong suit either. But we are we are a real conundrum to ourselves. And over the years, and of course I studied all the major theories, various folks tried to explain us, came up with theories about what makes us tick, what our makeup is all about, especially how our psyches operate. And, there's always a grain of truth in just about every major scheme that we come up with to explain things. But when you look really closely and you examine closely and then you run the data, you take measurements, you perform experiments, you collect evidence, all these theories have their weaknesses. We don't really know ourselves very well. The truth about ourselves eludes us. And I'll tell you why I think it needs to be our biggest concern. This is why I consider the character issue to be the defining issue of our time. And that is that all of the great things that we're able to do and all of the wonderful things that we've managed to learn, all of these things, as great as they are, if we don't get a handle on ourselves, if we don't come to understand ourselves at a truly deep level, what we're really all about, how we got where we are, where we're likely to be going, and what's likely in us that might just well put an end to it all if we don't get a really good grip on it. Because we haven't found the secret yet, how to live with one another. If we don't do that, all the knowledge that we've accumulated isn't going to matter. Because we won't be here. We could very easily succeed in wiping ourselves out. So, who we are really matters. And what we need to do to live together in some kind of reasonable peace and harmony probably needs to be our biggest concern, because all the rest will become relatively irrelevant. We live in a time, and I've said this before. One of the great paradigm shifts in the past several decades has been this shift toward what professionals call the cognitive behavioral paradigm within psychology. And basically, I know I'm oversimplifying here, but basically, that paradigm says that how we behave, what we do, the way in which we conduct ourselves is inextricably linked to the way we think about things. How we think impacts very heavily how we act. Some would say it even determines how we act. So that's been the paradigm shift over the past several decades. And I work within that paradigm. I realized many years ago that when you're dealing with folks who have some degree of character disturbance, you better be adopting that paradigm as opposed to some of the more traditional approaches, because they are of limited utility. And I write about that in both my books, In Sheep's Clothing and Character Disturbance, and I've written hundreds of articles literally on all sorts of websites, including the Manipulative-People blog. So we live in an age where we've accumulated enough knowledge, especially enough knowledge about how to make these terrible weapons of mass destruction, that someone, just one individual, with just the right kind of perverted thinking pattern, could do untold damage. And a group of folks with such a distorted worldview or perverted thinking pattern could do incredible damage. This is why world leaders are so nervous now about certain regimes developing the technology to carry out these kinds of acts of war. It's not like we don't have the technology, if we needed to use it, to fire a bunch of missiles and to, blow things up, even blow up an entire country that we think might pose a threat to us. The problem really comes in the fact that we have all of these different groups with these radical ideologies. And we know that the way people think is inextricably connected to the way they act. And some people's mindsets about the way this world works and the way it ought to work, the value of people, the value of women, the benefits of freedom, the importance of adhering to a single guiding philosophy, the way certain people think about those things, is spawning a host of terror mentalities that pose an unprecedented threat to us, to all of us. And the reason for that threat being so unprecedented is that should any of these ideologues procure weapons of mass destruction, then all bids are off. Untold damage could be done. 9/11 would pale in comparison. And some people would be overjoyed. So as I've said before on this program, we have two great enemies facing us. One is the twisted thinking from without, this perverted mentality that seeks to justify a primal urge to dominate and subjugate. This is something in us that we haven't yet honestly reckoned with. And then we have another enemy from within, and that is a culture that enables, promotes, and even rewards poor character development. Those are our two great enemies. They're the enemies of social order and especially of freedom. And that's why primarily I do this program. And it's why I've devoted my life to studying the human condition and especially how the human psyche operates. And I'm well enough versed in all the major metaphors to know how many weaknesses they all have. We don't have a good paradigm just yet for understanding who we are, what we're all about, what we're really after, and especially what would possibly save us from ourselves. But the quest goes on. Perhaps you have some ideas about that. Perhaps you want to share a story or two. Perhaps you just want to ask a question or two. If you want to join the discussion, the number to call is 718-717-8296. That's 718-717-8296. Boy, what a treat we had this past week with the theater that was the latest go-round in the Congress for the Benghazi hearings, with Hillary Clinton testifying. And as you know, on this program, we don't get into politics per se, because that's an endless thing. And I'm one of those folks who so fervently and passionately protects my independence of political thought. It's not funny. I know that both friends of mine on both sides of the political spectrum will poo-poo the notion of political independence as just basically an ambivalence or an namby-pambiness or a indecision or a weakness of philosophical mindset. Well, that's not the case for me. I'm a staunch independent for a reason, and that is because I find grains of truth and good intent in both sets of political arguments often. But I also find unnecessary and potentially dangerous radicalism to be perhaps the greatest threat to our freedoms. So I'm one of those that maintains the naive hope that one of these days we're going to have an honest and open and free discussion of all of the issues facing us, so that we can actually solve our problems without coming at it from two polar opposite extremes and never finding any common ground. So when I was watching this theater, and it was truly theater, when I was watching this theater that is the Benghazi hearing this past week, it was truly amazing to me. It was truly amazing to me how many folks were willing to expose themselves on national television for the kinds of phony, insincere, shallow, mean-spirited people that they are. Now, here I am making a value judgment. And yes, I am. One of the things that therapists and folks going into the helping professions in psychology and social work and professional counseling of all type were told is that that's one thing you didn't do. When you're dealing with clients, you want to maintain a complete lack of bias and a complete lack of judgment, so that you don't. I see we have a call coming in. I'm going to merge that call. see who we have on the line. Hello, and welcome to Character Matters.
Hi, Dr. Simon. This is Vince. How are you this evening?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I have quite a tale to tell you, but before I do, I just wanted to say I've gone back. I started listening to your first broadcast here at UCY, and that goes back to the 9th of April back in 2014. So there's not many that I missed, but I thought I'd go back through and really pick up on some stuff. And what I found most interesting in your very first episode, you was talking about how, you'd gone through all the schooling and all the learning and all these ideas that were given to you, and you found how they didn't work. Now, and you may be surprised, maybe not now, but you've got a lot broader audience that you're broadcasting to at UCY, and I think a lot of what you have to say is really relevant to all of us here. I think we all probably speak a little differently. Street, academic, legalese. There's all different types of language, the nuance in our voice and our body language, our facial expressions, and so on. But I think it's fascinating that we continue to understand one another. And you'd made reference that you'd wondered about bad behavior coming from culture being expressed in television and so forth, or is that actually a reflection of the decline of character? So I'd like to give you a chance to comment, and then I have quite an intriguing story for you.
Okay, let me make that comment first, and then I'd love to hear your story. Really, I think one of the key things that I came to realize, and really I didn't realize this on my own, I was introduced to a wonderful theorist during my professional training who makes this point about the dynamic interactions between our innate tendencies and our environment. And, there's always been this kind of nature-nurture debate, and there's always been this kind of debate about, are we just kind of pre-wired to behave in certain ways, or does our environment completely shape us? But really, there is such a dynamic interaction between us and the environment during our development that it's not as simple as that. And I think that what I'm seeing here with our culture and the character crisis that we face is similar. As fewer and fewer of us have the kind of character in early adult life that we really need to behave responsibly, we create a climate, a social climate. We basically establish the mores, the rules, the norms. And as those norms then take root for the next generation, those new norms and standards of behavior, et cetera, shape people. So it works both ways. We shape our environments, and our environment shapes us too. There's this dynamic interaction. So this decline that has occurred over time is a combination of factors. That's the way I see it. Your comments about that?
Yes, you further made statement that, in a sense, if I can paraphrase, we're kind of, and I know for a fact myself, certainly, have been retarded in our development, whether we're speaking about character, and most importantly, our character. So, through life, whether it be from broken families or just the influence of culture, and you go back into the 70s and 60s, and you've got the westerns with the bad guy, or the good guy facing the temptations of life and maybe slips, and then comes back along to redevelop and become a good person through life. And I find that very interesting for myself. That at about 15, I had basically pretty much solidified my path that I was going to travel for a while. And but I'd like to go on and skip ahead, and just about 2 years ago, I'd gone to my 30th high school reunion, and I rode up with my godson's mother and her then soon-to-be husband, and I was just so really proud that finally, she's going to have a guy, and I'm not going to have to worry about her son in life. And as I got to know him a little bit more, I said, well, this guy's, on the dope, and well, it's not too bad. And then I discovered just how bad it was as he about brained me. Literally cracked my head open for me. Long story there. But to go on, from about 2 years ago, across from where they live, there's this guy, and I know you'll know what this means, a level 4 offender. I'm not sure what the levels are and all of that.
Yeah.
So this goes back some 2 years of this guy across the street, and it ends up he's staring across the road, spying, coming over into the yard, peeking through the windows, and even entering the house. Now, here just like a month ago, and this is here in Arkansas, Van Buren County, I guess it made the papers, but I had missed it. But over the last 2 years after that incident, I haven't seen much of my godson or his mom. But anyways, we've talked to a couple of times. He's come to visit and came just a few days ago and told me the story. This guy, she's asleep, and the guy breaks it, comes into the house, and he's there naked, comes into her doorway and doing all these crazy, poses and like karate or whatever, and just making these weird noises. And lo and behold, about that time, her husband comes in and they'd like to beat this guy to death. Now, the cops said they'd been watching him and just wishing that they could catch him, do something before he hurt somebody. It turns out the lady's cats next door all disappeared, and I won't go into the details of that, but you might imagine. This guy almost got away with it too. He's like, they drug me out of my house and beat me, and the arresting cops there, they didn't have much to charge him with. But once some of the sheriff detectives, the investigator, found out what was going on, and the prosecutor, they went in and put some more charges against this guy. So I think he's looking at maybe 40 years, which will be a life sentence for him, thank goodness. But these people that exist in our world, it's for something like that touch so close to home, and to think that what could have happened, what that guy could have done, it just boggles up one's mind, I think.
Yeah. Let me take a minute here to explain to the audience, because you mentioned a couple of things. And I don't know I don't know how many people in the audience even know this, but as part of my professional career, when the assessment of sexual offenders in Arkansas went from the responsibility of the state police to just rank folks for community notification based on a crude actuarial tool, when the responsibility was transferred to a division within the Arkansas Department of Correction, and a well-trained unit was being developed to do these assessments, I was the first supervising psychologist for this program, and along with the director, helped devise the guidelines for doing these assessments. Supervised about a little over 2,100 assessments myself before I retired from that. But you mentioned these level 4 offenders, and I just wanted to explain what that means here in our state. All states are obliged to observe at least the minimum standards that the federal government sets, and the federal government wants at a very minimum a 3-tier system, low, medium, high level of risk for offenders. And there's a great deal of debate about just what that risk means. There are two elements in our state, fortunately, I believe this is the case, that enter into that risk. And that one is the risk that something will happen again. In other words, the risk that the offender will commit a similar crime. The second thing that factors into the risk is what they're likely to do if they do something. And to give you an example of how, they're not quite the same thing, there are certain folks who have certain, like sexual fetishes. I don't know if you remember. Do you remember the guy? I think he was in Conway, the notorious toe sucker. You remember this guy?
No, but I do know Toadsuck has a festival every year.
Yeah. No, this guy was not the toad suck, but this guy was a toe sucker, and he would wait at like bus stops and stuff like that, and stare and then basically quote unquote attack when he saw some toes that really interested him. But I
believe I remember that. Actually,
yeah. He didn't do anything. He didn't do anything really horrible to people. Naturally, they were grossed out.
Almost its own punishment.
Yeah. People who have such fetishes, they're likely to do these things over and over and over again. So in other words, the risk that they'll do these things again is very, very high, extremely high. But what they do is not so awful that you immediately have to close down the streets, alert the media. Do you know what I'm saying?
Right.
So, fortunately, in Arkansas, two things enter into risk. We made that by design. One is how likely they are to do it again, and we have actuarial instruments to help us determine that with some accuracy. And then the second thing is what they're likely to do when they do it, and that's a bigger element of risk. So if somebody's fixation is on like abducting and then torturing children, we don't care if they've only thought about it once before, right? If that's their thing, they're dangerous. And at level 4, we established a level that in many states, I misspoke. In some states, this level results in involuntary confinement. And it has to do with having a mental illness or a mental defect of some kind or a condition of some kind, that a clinical condition that predisposes the person to sexually violent behavior, and especially to predatory type behavior. So a level 4 offender is somebody who's got some kind of thing going on. It could be a mental illness. It could be some other kind of clinical condition. It could be a sexual fixation, or paraphilia, as we call it. And that is so strong and so deeply rooted that it predisposes them to predatory sexual acts. That's a level 4 offender. I just wanted to explain that. Now, if we were some of the other states, we would have this person locked away and off the streets involuntarily. But we don't have involuntary confinement in Arkansas.
Well, certainly in a case like that, I think it would definitely be applicable. I mean, somebody like that, I don't believe in the death penalty, but what do you do? I mean, you could almost think that just knocking them in the head or slitting their throat or something like that would have been, beneficial for him and society, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's very interesting because, as you know, the United States has the highest prison population of the free world, or the world actually, and a higher percentage. And there's so much talk now about the beds we could free up if a lot of folks who didn't need to be incarcerated were not incarcerated, and yet we don't have involuntary confinement for these folks for whom there is basically no cure and whose conditions predispose them to these predatory acts. They're the most dangerous types, and it is kind of scary.
They did shut down. There was, what was it, back in the 70s or 80s when they really started shutting down all the mental facilities and all these, most generally homeless people mostly were probably, came towards the
Yeah, there's another. Yeah, there's an example. I've written about this several times. There's another example of where good intentions are so totally insufficient to solving a problem. And it's so hard to have an honest discussion about these things because of the political arguments you get on both sides of the spectrum. It was true that there were abuses in some of these long-term care facilities. There was a movie that came out called Snake Pit that really dramatized that. It is true that there were abuses, and it was also true that people's freedoms were unnecessarily restricted. So there was some outcry about that. And then about the same time that this outcry was developing, medicines came on the scene that could really help remit symptoms of chronic mental illness. Now, we can't cure most forms of chronic mental illness, like schizophrenia. We can't cure it. There's still no cure for it. But we have these medicines now that can really control the symptoms of it. So when we were able to do that, there was all this pressure to let folks out of these institutions and give them their freedom back. Here's the problem. They get out, and by law, here's another well-meaning law, by law, unless they're imminently dangerous, homicidal, suicidal, and imminently so, you can't involuntarily commit them. So they get out, they don't want to take their medicine anymore, and before long they're living on the streets, and they can't reason. They sometimes they're dangerous, sometimes they're seeing things, hearing things, and that's what we did with all kinds of good intention, but we really messed up.
Yeah. There's made comment in chat, 80%, I don't know if this is a right number, but Mike's pretty good at his research. 80% of the prison population is, I don't know if that's directly due to drug offenses or related. And I would say through social engineering that most certainly that there has been, the rise in prison population is for profit now. And so,
yeah. Well, here's the problem, though, with just taking the numbers at face value. I not understand the numbers, but here's the problem. The way the system works and the way how difficult it is to get the wheels of justice to turn. Let's say some thug who you know has offed a dozen of his friends. He's not just a user, he's a dealer. I'm just giving it for instance. And he's already been incarcerated once. He's out on parole. He's back to his old stuff. He's done this and done that. But you can't nail him on something. It would be too difficult to prosecute him. You can't get witnesses, whatnot. You don't have the evidence. You really suspect he's involved in this or that. But he misses his parole visits, and he has a dirty drug screen, and you're able to get him back in.
For 90 days.
Right. Well, and then if he violates more or he's caught, if he gets out again and he's caught selling or whatever, he's back in. The numbers don't tell you the whole story. We might have such a huge population that's in there on drug offenses. And for those for which that's the whole deal, I agree with you. Probably we're taking up prison space, but we don't know for sure. And I would dare say, having the experience that I have, that there's a fair percentage of folks for whom the nature of the offense doesn't tell the whole story. Matter of fact, the nature of the offensive record doesn't tell the whole story. Even if say it's a manslaughter charge, it doesn't tell the whole story.
Well, I mean, how far do you go with this? Like in California, they can enhance a misdemeanor and file a habitual criminal and give somebody life for stealing a piece of pizza. Most with the drug deals now going on, and most of it's the federal intervention, and that's a 99% conviction rate. And the system itself is skewed, and I'm certain that you probably realize that as well. But you know what, it's hard to have a good logical discussion and bypass all the steps of the trivium. So going back to that language, sometimes each of us have a little different language, and so I don't want to go too far without having enough information that I may be misunderstood. And that would refer, of course, to the prison industrial complex, and also the pharmaceutical, the petrochemicals that are pumped into people. My sister's a doctor. They're taught nowadays to be a little more than pimps for the pharmaceuticals, and maybe there are some chemicals that can help balance people, but I think generally we're going to find that more in nature than being synthesized.
Well, thanks for sharing your comments again. I appreciate you calling in, and hope we'll talk again some other time.
Thank you very much, Dr.
Simon. I'm going to be following up on something that you just mentioned here after you hang up, but I appreciate your call.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye. We're back on, I hope. We had an inappropriate hang up there of our phone line, so I hope that we're back on the air. That was an interesting call, and I want to say that one of the other tragedies, I think, one of the bigger tragedies of our time is that we have all this debate going on about who should be in prison and why do we have so many people in prison who shouldn't be in prison, perhaps. But the larger debate is, why do we have so many dysfunctional folks in our society for where it's even a consideration that they might have to go to prison? What's going on here that such a high percentage of our population can't function responsibly or won't function responsibly? And I've heard all of the excuses, especially all the economic excuses. This is an incredibly affluent country by any standard. We don't know. Even in the really poorest circles, we don't know how an awful lot of the world lives. And some who have so much less wouldn't dream of doing the things to one another that some of us do. For me, that is the greater tragedy and the bigger question to ask. What in the world is going on here? Why is this character crisis so great? That's the bigger question. That is the bigger question for me. Why do we have such huge problems with people being able to function in a socially responsible way? How did it happen? Where did we lose our anchors? How did it come to this? How did it come to a point? How did it come to a point that 1 in 10 of us, actually the number is slightly higher than that, will spend a good portion of his or her life incarcerated. And how is this acceptable? How is this acceptable to anyone? That's for me is the bigger question to answer. So I've heard the arguments before about what we need to do, but of course, as you recognize, this program is all about what I consider to be at the root of the problem, and that is the character crisis that we face. Until we deal with that, until we deal with the root of the problem, we're going to continue to have a basically dysfunctional society. And in our society, where we have this wonderful, it was a great idea, it still is a great idea, this idea of self-governance, this idea that decent people, if left alone, can do fantastic things because they're not hamstrung, they're not tied down, they're not encumbered by excessive regulation. This whole idea that decent people could govern their own affairs, establish their own rules, without having to have them imposed from above. A wonderful idea. An idea in danger of dying. It's under threat every day. It's under threat every day. Our freedoms are under assault every single day. And it's primarily because so many of us have proven incapable of functioning responsibly. You know, we're going to do a program coming up pretty soon on just on the topic of these crazy events that occur when lone gunmen or angry actors out, and I know that I just misused the term there, go to public places to basically take their anger and vengeance out on the world and go down themselves in a blaze of glory. We're going to do a program on that in the next several weeks. And then I want to make an announcement, too. I'm also going to have a program coming up in the next couple of weeks in which I'll feature an interview that I did with another one of the hosts of another program on UCY.tv, Michael Cross, who I interviewed because he's got a new book out that follows, interestingly enough, the exploits of a female psychopathic character. A rarity in and of itself, a female psychopath. But they're out there. And Michael has done a good job of getting the dynamics right when it comes to psychopathy. So I think you'll enjoy his work, and I think you'll enjoy the discussion that we had. It'll be a partly recorded program. And that'll be coming up in the next couple of weeks, so you won't want to miss that. I also have another couple of guests lined up for the next few weeks. So in the next 5 or 6 weeks, we will have at least 2 guests, and then one shortly after that, too. So it'll be a little bit of a change from the format of the program coming up. I also want to announce that professional workshops will be starting at the first of the year through cross-country seminars. I'll be going around the country again, training professionals in how to recognize, understand, and deal with character disturbance, especially manipulative people. So I'll be doing those workshops, and I'll have information for you on some future programs about where these workshops will be taking place, which ones of them may be open to the public as well. I'll have information for you on that. So stay tuned. You won't want to miss that. I've said this often before. I think it's worth repeating again. When the program closes, you're going to hear this theme song that my wife and I wrote back in 1999, and which, by the way, we just learned today won an award from the American Choral Directors Association. We decided to submit that piece along with two other of my inspirational pieces. So we submitted three altogether to a showcase on the American Choral Directors Association website. And America, My Home, Anthem for the Millennium, won a Silver Platter Award. So I'm really happy about that. And I sure hope that it generates some interest for performances around the country. There have already been hundreds, but I'd like there to be even more. And the reason for that is that I want the message to get out there. This is still a great place. It's a wonderful experiment in human freedom that we can't let die. But freedom and character are inextricably entwined. They're joined at the hip, as we say. One depends totally upon the other. This is what the framers knew. They knew this very well. They weren't perfect people by any means, but they had this fundamental idea that decent people, good people, were left alone, unencumbered, unrestricted, unrestrained, that they would create opportunities for themselves and for their fellow human beings, and that as a group, collectively, they would grow, prosper, create wealth, create more opportunity. And that's exactly what happened in this great experiment we call America. And that's why you hear this theme song play at the end of the program and at the beginning of the program. But it all depends on character. It all depends on that. If we don't have that compass, and if we don't step up to the plate, and if we don't guide our children, and if we don't reinforce the values, then there's always the threat that order will have to be imposed upon us. And that happens more and more every day, and freedom is lost in the balance. So, until next week, I'm Dr. George Simon, inviting you to join us again for another edition of Character Matters. Take care, and I'll see you then.